Lynn Cullen live in 1 minute.
What happened? We lost our open?
Yeah.
Am I on?
Yep, you're good.
Okay, we lost our open. That's okay. That's a perfect beginning for a Monday. An inauspicious start. I love it. Hello there and welcome. Yeah, we're on the, we're over the hump of March, but you wouldn't know it from the weather. So much for any of you who ever put anything, any stock in what that friggin' rodent in Punxsutawney supposedly says every year, right? We're supposed to have an early spring. This is the latest I can ever remember. There. I got that off my chest, and so much for the weather report. What's the date? It's the 18th. Oh, yeah, the day after St. Patrick's Day. Happy belated St. Patrick's Day to all of you. Sorry, I'm wearing orange today, but I guess it's after. I didn't wear it yesterday. I have no green. I've always find myself at a loss. I should just get one green thing, right? Like you people who have like Christmas sweaters. Ugh. I'm sorry. Have you ever seen a good-looking Christmas sweater?
Well, yeah.
Yeah?
I mean, they're ugly, but
they're ugly, but yeah. I mean, they're silly. They're whatever. Oh no, Jess, you're the one who said you were invited to a party where you had to wear.
ugly sweater.
You had to wear, I thought, a Christmas sweater. An ugly.
Right.
Yeah, right. And whoever had the most ridiculous one on, I guess, who knows, won. Well, here's my just little leftover. I'm going to start this off nice and easy. Little things I came across about the Irish language. Facts. And Jess here actually studied Irish, and that is what you call it. In English, it's called Irish. I thought it was like Gaelic or something, but it's not. It's Irish. The language of Ireland is Irish. Never mind that the vast majority of Irish people don't speak it. Now, here's why they don't speak it. Here's some facts about the language itself. There is no word for yes or no in Irish. Now, that to me is mind-blowing because that seems almost as basic as man, woman, yes, no, black, white. There is no word for yes. There is no word for Irish. For no in Irish. But you communicate negative or positive by use of a verb form. So if the question was, did they sell the house? The answer would be they sold or they didn't sell the house. You would not say yes or no. There's no shortcut. Well, what did they say? Okay, so if you ask,
Kind of can.
you can. So if I say, will you marry me? Will you marry me? They would say, I will marry you. You can't get away with one word.
I will.
I will.
But you can
But
sometimes.
but there's not a word for yes.
Sha.
Sha? And what? How come
And
you're
also sometimes ta.
ta? Did you make that up, or why isn't it in here?
Well, because
Okay, that's just it. It's a okay.
once in a while.
Okay. All right. Whatever. Anyway, no matter what Jeff says, there's no yes. There's no no. And then the word order. You know how when you learn a foreign language, sometimes you get all boggled up because they don't do the word order we do, which is subject, right? I, verb, want, that, object. Subject, verb, object. Why, that's the only reasonable way to speak. I want that. But it turns out that's not the only way to speak. And if you study other languages, you find that out in short order. But Irish has a particularly bizarre word order. And in fact, there are very few languages that use it because it doesn't make any sense. Okay, their order is verb, subject, object. So, I want that would be want I that.
like Yoda.
Right, like Yoda.
Yeah.
Okay, want I that. I saw a bird, saw I a bird. Well, okay, I can see where you could get used to that. Speak I Irish always. Okay, here's one that would blow your mind if you were trying to learn a language. The words for numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, are different depending on whether you are counting human beings or non-human, or things, right? So there's a whole separate kind of number system if you're counting horses than if you're counting children. And does the one for, Jess, do you know if the one for horses is the same one you use for inanimate objects like chairs? Or is that a whole other one? She can't remember. How would you take such a crazy class? Could lose your mind in this. Okay.
No, yeah. The horses would be like.
Horses is used for, there's human,
different than us.
people is different than anything else for counting. And the beginning of the word changes depending on the grammatical environment. The beginning of a word changes depending on the grammatical environment. Shoot me now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the word for woman, well, it depends. It could be bayan, bien, vien, mien, zien, tien, vien. It could be a lot of things depending on whether it comes after certain possessive pronouns or certain prepositions or certain numbers or a whole range of other things. Oh my God. No wonder the Irish are so no wonder they drink. See, I know but no wonder. This is a language that would drive anybody to drink.
It's not that hard once you get it.
Oh, yeah. And it says here, one of the other facts is, if you want to get from one side of Ireland to the next and only speak Irish, your odds of doing it are not great because the Irish can't stand it if you try to speak Irish to them. They throw you out of their stores. They tell you to get lost. Nobody wants to speak it. Somebody actually did a documentary doing this. He made it across, but it became difficult. So some little words about the Irish. I can't do any accents. Irish. I can't do a brogue. So, and here's a question for you. It has nothing to do with Irish, but it has to do with science. And it would seem to me that whatever the answer is to the question I'm about to pose to you would be something that would be very interesting to look at if you were trying to figure out how to keep football players and hockey players and soccer players from getting brain damage from all the hits they take to the head. And the question is, why don't woodpeckers damage their brains? By doing what woodpeckers do, pecking wood. And if you've ever seen or heard a woodpecker pecking wood, it's amazing. It's like a rat-a-tat-tat-tat-tat. So they're banging their heads into, and they do not suffer brain damage doing that. So it would seem if we could figure out what the heck a woodpecker has that an offensive lineman doesn't, we'd be on the way to maybe making it safer for people to play football. Just a thought. As for why they don't get brain damage, I don't know. I just have the question. I don't have the answer. But, of course, if you Google it, as you know, there it will be. Why don't woodpeckers, I'm sorry, get brain damage? Are you looking at that?
I'm looking at
Yeah, Jess is. Okay. Oh, I love stories like this about the hypocrisy of politicians. They, of course, are found often. I was going to say rife, but it didn't work in the context of what I had already begun in my sentence structure. The newspapers are rife with these kinds of stories all the time, and often, although stop and think, it has been a while. You remember where there was, it seemed like, oh, Jess?
Their skull is built to absorb shock.
Their skulls are specifically built so they can be woodpeckers.
There's a whole article about it.
Okay, there's a whole article. No, I don't care enough. Their skulls are particularly built to take shock, and ours aren't. So, I guess there's not much we can do. That's too bad. Okay. Well, what we could do, how about if we train woodpeckers to play football? So, stories of hypocrisy in politicians. The ones I particularly like are the ones where politicians are, totally against something. And then they're caught, of course, doing it. Now, what this usually is anybody who is no kind of politician is more than likely at some point to get caught up in this kind of thing. And it used to seem that every other week, some Republican conservative would be found to be having sex in a bathroom with a wombat, or, just weird stuff from people who were always so sort of like above it all and pointing their fingers always at us, the self-righteous crowd. And there hasn't been a lot of that lately, has there? But here's one that came across my peer view, and it doesn't have to do with sex. It has to do with another no-no on the right, and also among some Democrats. This is a case of a state legislator in New York. His name is Stephen Katz. He's 59 years old. He's a Republican from Mohegan Lake. And he was speeding and was stopped by an officer. And the officer could not help but notice the strong, unmistakable odor of marijuana in the assemblyman's car. So he was arrested and charged. And I mean, the amount he had, he's charged as a misdemeanor. He had to pay $100, but it's embarrassing if you're an elected official who has voted against a bill that would have legalized medical marijuana. This guy was against that. Why, who knows if you legalize medical marijuana, what could happen? Why, people will just start smoking it willy-nilly, like I do. So this is another one of those cases in point. And, of course, this legislator serves on the Committee on Alcoholism and Drug Abuse. You know, after a long, boring meeting of the Alcoholism and Drug Abuse Committee, Assemblyman Katz would often repair to his home to get stoned. It just relaxed him. And it turns out that he had been in trouble with the police once before. And I don't have a lot of information about this, but it's certainly interesting and bears looking into. It turns out that the marijuana-loving Republican Stephen Katz is also a veterinarian. And he was once charged with attacking a chihuahua. A chihuahua that he was treating. I guess one of his clients, owners, I guess the clients, the chihuahua, was none too happy with the way Dr. Katz, at the time, was dealing with his little honey, and charged that the doctor abused his chihuahua. Okay, so that was not his. So the marijuana is his second arrest. He was actually arrested for, abusing a chihuahua. And I'll tell you, you know how there's gateway drugs. There's also if a kid, rips wings off of flies, you got to watch that kid. That kid could grow up to be, a horrible sociopath. And here too, if you're a vet who molests chihuahuas, the fact that you could be a drug addict, it's not a stretch. Yes, we have a caller. Hello?
Wait a minute. A veterinarian named Katz?
Yes, indeed.
What was that?
That's very good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all I had. That's
Well, that was good.
The veterinarian's name is Katz.
Yes, he was, and it didn't even occur to me because it started with a K, which reminds me of that story I've often told about a friend of mine whose name was Katz, Katz, and she pronounced it Kates.
Why?
Why? That's
Did
what
he
I
do
said.
it?
Yeah, of course. I said, come on. Hey, look, if you don't want people to think you're Jewish, then get rid of the name Katz because no one looks at that and says Kates. What a bunch of nonsense. And she could pass. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. Kates.
I like the fact that the guy's name was Katz and he taxed a chihuahua. That was funny.
He also, and I didn't get into it, did something with a German Shepherd that we don't want to talk about either, a dead one.
Oh, no, I don't want to hear
No. I'm making it sound worse than it was. He was allegedly had disposed of the animal's carcass in a incorrect manner.
Well, if you got a veterinarian named Katz, don't take your dog there. That's the bottom line.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Bye. All all right. Oh, there's a lot of, we've talked about it here, about the fact that handwriting, penmanship, script is all going the way of, it's gone. It's as good as gone. They're not even going to teach it in school anymore. You ask anybody under 20 to write something and they can't. They will print it, but they won't write it. And so it's going to be gone. A few people will keep it alive. It'll be something people will want to take classes in knowing how to write in script because it's so lovely. And there's been a lot of things written about it, bemoaning the loss of it. I am one who bemoans the loss of it, as I bemoan the loss of, old-fashioned books. But there's one of the books out is called The Missing Ink, which of course is a pun. The Missing Ink, The Lost Art of Handwriting. But in it, this guy says, and I'm sure a lot of people would say, oh, this is so overboard. But to me, it's not. He argues that handwriting actually fills a human need. And here's how he puts it. It involves us in a relationship with the written word, which is sensuous, immediate, and individual. It opens our personality out to the world and gives us a means of reading other people. Now, that's true. We all know our handwriting is somewhat like our fingerprint, and our handwriting does gives away our emotional state, gives away all kinds of information if, in fact, you are a graphologist who knows how to look and analyze handwriting. But the idea that as you write, and I agree with the sensuous part, the fact that letters are looped and connected, there's something wonderful about that, about just the flow of it sensually on paper. And it is immediate and it is personal and individual. And when you get, just as sometimes you're surprised when you see somebody whose voice you have only heard, because they didn't sound like that, whatever it is you conjure that voice sounding like. The same is true of handwriting. You're sometimes surprised when somebody you know to be maybe whatever, rough and tumble, happens to write something to you, and there's a again, like a sensual beauty and softness in their script. So all that's going to be lost. Do you get, as we look at these impacts of, the moving forward technologically, do you see how a lot of things that we really do define as human are getting lost? This is one. The other is eyeball-to-eyeball conversation. And then even if you take the eyeball-to-eyeball away and telephonic communication, when you could hear the other person speak, that's going, in terms of what even we choose. So anybody who poo-poos the impact on how we know each other, how we communicate with each other, how we are intimate with each other. If you think that these changes mean nothing, you're nuts. They do. They mean a lot of things. We can't necessarily know what. It's always those unintended consequences. Why, who knew that when Henry Ford figured out mass production and the assembly line, that there'd be this mass, it would create a massive migration. Who knew that? Of people away from cities. Because they could. Who knew that the creation of, roadways to facilitate these dang cars would create whole new industries, service industries, right? And totally change the landscape. You don't know. I was thinking that the other day, actually, because I saw an electric car charger station somewhere, and I thought, I wonder what it's going to look like in 20 years. Because the gas stations will go. Eventually, they're gone. They'll be replaced by some kind of, they have to be. It'll be a whole different infrastructure for batteries and electric cars. And they will come. I mean, someone will take that, something will happen. In other countries, it would be the government that, of course, get this off the ground. But around here, of course, that's not allowed. So that is that. Okay. A little late on my first break here, so let's do it. And I'm coming back in just a minute.
Email your questions and comments to Lynn at pghcitypaper.com or call Lynn at 412-316-3381. Lynn Cullen Live will return in a moment.
I didn't know about chronic obstructive pulmonary disease until I took the wheel and lent my support to Drive for COPD. Help Americans take action against this leading cause of death by logging on to driveforcopd.org to learn more. I'm Nancy Cartwright, the voice of Bart Simpson, and I drive for COPD.
Pittsburgh City Paper's annual Dining Guide magazine is available now. Pick up one today for a look at the best restaurants in the region. Plus, this week's City Paper includes great deals for St. Patty's Day, Good Brother Earl, and Big Bad Voodoo. Pittsburgh City Paper available at over 1,700 locations throughout Western Pennsylvania and on the web at pghcitypaper.com and on your smartphone at citypapermobile.com.
Have a question or an opinion? Call Lynn Cullen at 412-316-3381 or email lynn at pghcitypaper.com. Now, more with Lynn Cullen Live.
Okie doke. A few little emails to catch up with. Melanie writes, and it's a good idea. She says you should have Michelle Dressbold, I think it is. Dressbold. On your show. It would be interesting to get her take. Michelle Dressbold, I think, right, is, I have her number somewhere, is, in fact, a graphologist, is a handwriting expert, is called in as a expert witness. And she's always been a fascinating guest on this. And that's a damn good idea, Melanie. I'll see if I can get her. And she's a delightful person. Delightful. Good idea. Ray writes. I got you, Ray. There may not be any woodpeckers playing football, but there sure are a lot of peckerwoods in the game. Jess, you'll be sorry. Jess didn't like that. She went, ha ha. You'll be sorry because you know what? The next thing is P.S. to Jess. And I can't read it. It says something like, Le fiel padreg sona duit.
It means happy St. Patrick's Day.
That's right. To you.
Oh, back at ya.
Back at you, she says. That's very nice. And PJ writes, lamenting progress. We are going to be characterless cyborgs. See, that's what I think. No more Oscar Wildes. Yeah, see, that's what I think. Hey, speaking of Oscar Wilde, there was also a review of a book that was written about his wife. Did you know he had one? Yes, he did. And her name was Constance. And she was, like her name implies, constant. She stuck with him through all of it, through his imprisonment, and she was beautiful. God, she was a good-looking woman. I threw it away. I had something here somewhere. But I do agree. And, not to beat a dead horse, because I think I've talked about this kind of thing before. You look at our children today. If there's a child who's different, like I'm sure Oscar Wilde was as a child, if there's a child who's different, a little outrageous, hard to control, doesn't pay attention, disruptive, what do we do with that kid today? I mean, all too often, we medicate them. We say that they have some kind of disorder, and we medicate them. And so they don't grow up to be Oscar Wilde, right? You think of all the geniuses that have contributed to what we like to call our civilization, and I think if you were to look at them, very few were like well-behaved, follow the rules type, because if they did that, they wouldn't have distinguished themselves. People who follow the rules are faceless. They're just the rule followers. It's people who break the rules that become somebody. And if, as a culture, you really start coming down on the rule breakers, and many cultures do, and ours more so, it seems now. It's crazy, to medicalize quirkiness. Who knows what will be lost? You won't know, but you can take that little wondrous craziness away from a child, and you just make them into another child instead of the genius they were intended to be. Instead of the great musician or composer or artist, or this is what will happen. And I'm not the first to point this out. And all you have to do is look at the childhoods or the pasts of some of the great minds of our time as we know them, because you can bet there's so many great minds who we'll never know, and who just didn't live in a place where they could flower, or where whatever their contribution was made known or had their name attached to it. You gotta wonder. So this fear that PJ suggests that we are going to be characterless cyborgs, I would argue that in many cases, that's always the danger of society's drive to sort of make things work, to make things efficient, to figure out how to corral all these human beings and give them structure. And, some do it, frightening fashion, some societies, and some have been more lenient. Ours, we have, it seems to me we have a very lenient strain in our sense of self, this individualism that we talk about, and where we sort of herald the rule breakers, the Robin Hoods, that kind of thing. But at the same time, there are, it's not new. I mean, you think of a movie like The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit, right? I mean, that was about the kind of the deadening sameness of the 50s and corporatization and the soul numbingness of working in that, where every man looked the same. We're all wearing gray flannel suits and our fedoras, and I have our briefcases, and we all do this, and then we all go home, and then we all have this, and then we all do that. And there are people still who obviously just love that kind of structure. But I don't see how world changers come out of that kind of structure. I don't. Okay, so guys, did you see this thing on the BBC? Why didn't I see it in... Is this old news that somehow the BBC just wrote something about it that I never knew about? Lyndon Johnson? And here, I'll just get it to you. Johnson, as you know, taped while he was president. Oh, no, am I going to sneeze? Oh, don't let it. No, can't. I think I have a record going of 30 years of never having sneezed on broadcasting. There. All right. Now, it just might sneak up on me and come exploding out at any moment, and I say beforehand, I'm sorry if it happens. So he recorded all these amazing phone conversations he had, and they're fascinating. And they've been declassified in batches, much like Nixon, who came after him, did the same. And it brought Nixon down, as we know, those tape recordings. But the final batch of tapes have been released by the Lyndon Baines Johnson Library, and it covers his that extraordinary year in American history, 1968. It's a year I will never forget. It's a year in which I despaired for the future more than I ever had. It's the year in which Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. It's the year that Robert Kennedy was assassinated. It's the year of the Democratic Convention in Chicago that was the most horrific thing, and I was there in Chicago. It's the year I got off the L going to see my great aunt and walked across Michigan Avenue right around where the water tower is, and there were tanks on the streets with barbed wire mounted on the front of them. And there were soldiers carrying guns. And this was right before the Democratic Convention. And by the time I got to her apartment, I was literally shaking. And I said, I never in my life thought I would see something like this in my country. She was an invalid. I said, Aunt Faye, there are tanks. It reminded me of like the pictures I seen of 1956 Hungary. I said, there are tanks on the street and soldiers, and the threat they perceive is us. It's me. I was flipped out. 68, what a year. So anyway, this was the year, too, where Johnson had told us that he would not seek re-election, which was astonishing. And so he was not in Chicago. But he was watching, as we all were, watching that horrific violence and the insanity on the convention floor. And so according to these released tapes, and I never heard this before, did you? Johnson placed a call to the staff at the convention, in which he was obviously backing his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, for the nomination. And he was fearful that Humphrey was not going to make it. And so he said, I'm planning to leave here, Texas. I'm going to fly into Chicago, and I'm going to announce I will put my name forward as a candidate for re-election. He wanted to know if he didn't want to do it, if he didn't have the delegates. He called Mayor Daley. He said, do I have the delegates? And Daley checked around and said, yes, I would. He could guarantee the party would fall in line behind LBJ. It was discussed whether they could possibly land Marine One, the helicopter Marine One, on the roof of the Hilton Hotel, which was the scene, right near the scene of so much of the rioting, if they could land on the roof to avoid trouble. Finally, I guess this whole idea got shelved in part because the Secret Service said there's just no way we can secure this situation at all. We do not want you going there. There's, pandemonium there. We have no control. Please don't think of doing this. So he didn't. And as you know, Humphrey did get the nod. Now, the even more astonishing stuff that was in these latest tapes that were just released was this. By the time of the election, November 68, Johnson had incontrovertible evidence that the Republican nominee, Richard M. Nixon, had actively sabotaged the Vietnam War peace talks in Paris. Or as Nixon put it when he was talking to somebody about it, he said Nixon has blood on his hands and this is treasonous. So imagine that. The president has evidence of treason by the Republican nominee. How does he get it? I remember this very well. There was a Paris peace talks going on. The North Vietnamese and us in Paris. They were gaining some ground. Nixon thinks if they manage a peace treaty, I'm not going to get elected. It will derail my campaign. So he sets up this clandestine backdoor thing with a woman whose name some of you older folks will remember, Anna Chennault. Chenault, I think she pronounced it. Chenault represented Nixon. She met with the South Vietnamese ambassador in Nixon's New York apartment in July. And she essentially relayed that they should not make any concessions to the North because they must wait for Nixon to become president because he will get the South a much better deal than Johnson would get them. And so, on the eve of what was a planned announcement by the Johnson White House that there was an agreement to halt all bombing in the Vietnam War, all of a sudden, the South Vietnamese government pulled out, scuttled the deal. Johnson was told why. He was told why by the FBI, and he was told why by, I think, the National National Security Agency. Because the NSA was intercepting communications with Saigon, so they knew what had been going on. The FBI, too, had tapped the ambassador, the South Vietnamese ambassador's phone, and so they'd heard him in talks with, they knew what was going on. President Johnson was told by his defense secretary, Clark Clifford, that this kind of interference was illegal and potentially treasonous. And with these tapes that have been released, you can hear Johnson reacting to finding this out from the FBI. And he gets on the phone and calls Senator Richard Russell, very, very powerful senator at the time. And he says this: "We have found that our friend, the Republican nominee, our California friend, has been playing on the outskirts with our enemies and our friends both. He has been doing it through rather subterranean sources. Chenault is warning the South Vietnamese not to get pulled into this Johnson move." President Johnson orders Nixon to be placed under FBI surveillance. He wants to know if Nixon is personally involved in this. And then when he became convinced that it was orchestrated by Nixon himself, the president places a call to Republican Senator Everett Dirksen of Illinois, the Republican leader of the Senate. And he tells Dirksen to get a message to Nixon that the president knows what you're doing, and he says, "You back off or we'll charge you with treason." This is going on in the 68 campaign? Publicly, Nixon was saying he had no idea why the South Vietnamese withdrew from the talks. Why wouldn't Johnson have just finished Nixon off at this point? Because he feared, all this is on the tapes, he feared that going publicly telling people what was going on, that would then require revealing that both the FBI and the NSA were intercepting communications and bugging people. As you know, Nixon won. And he won by less than 1% of the vote. The reason it was never used, in part, too, was not only did they not want to show the fact that there was bugging and interception of communiques going on, but they also thought by their polling that Humphrey had it, that he was going to win. And the information had been passed on to Humphrey. And he was told he probably shouldn't use it unless he absolutely had to. And Humphrey thought he didn't have to. And he thought it would be too disruptive. Typical Democrat. Too disruptive to the country to accuse the Republicans of treason. So he said nothing. And he lost. As I said, by less than 1% of the popular vote. And we all know what happened when Richard Nixon got in. He escalated the war in Vietnam. He escalated it into Cambodia. He escalated it into Laos. 22,000 more Americans died. And finally, in Nixon's second term, there's a peace agreement, 1973. And believe me, that same kind of deal was in the grasp of the Johnson administration in 1968. But it had been scuttled by Richard Nixon. Amazing. Or not. Okie doke, time for my second break. I'll be right back.
Stick around for more with Lynn Cullen live after this.
Here at the GED Pep Talk Center, we've got a pep talk that can motivate you.
Sometimes things don't always turn out the way you want them to.
You can improve
your future. Now get your game face on and take the first step towards a better life. Hurry up. Don't make me repeat myself.
Whatever level of motivation you need, we've got a pep talk for you. Call 1-877-38-YOUR-GED or visit yourged.org for your pep talk and for free classes in your area. GED is a registered trademark of the American Council on Education. Brought to you by Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Go to bergbargains.com for great deals on museums, shows, and meals from your favorite local restaurants. This week only, get discounts up to 50% for the Jerome Bettis Grill. Supplies are limited. bergbargains.com, Pittsburgh's best bargains. bergbargains.com.
You're listening to Lynn Cullen live at pghcitypaper.com. Once again, here's Lynn Cullen.
Chuck writes, back to the handwriting things. A few weeks ago, I finally gave in and purchased a tablet PC. I've been avoiding this, but I finally had a list of legitimate reasons. One of them, I'm taking a class in the evenings. I wanted to be able to take notes on a digital tablet, not on paper. I test drove literally 24 different note-taking software packages and finally settled on the one that allowed me to store my own handwritten notes. I found that my handwritten notes were much more meaningful, more useful, when I was able to, doodle in the margin, ignore the ruled lines, use my own personal shorthand chicken scratch. And then he says, Sister Gonzaga, my third grade penmanship teacher, would be proud. Well, I don't know, Chuck. I don't know if she would like you doodling in the margins and not following the lines. Would she? She'd be proud that you were still writing in your Palmer method. Doesn't it always blow your mind how you see some people do seem to have the exact same handwriting as other people and they're usually elementary school teachers because they have to do that perfect Palmer method, and they still, to this day, that is how they write. Blows me away. It just blows me away. Okay. Moving on. Oh, God, I hate this. Here again, I know Abraham Lincoln was a great president and all that, but I'm sorry. I think, over more than 150 years later, I wish we'd lost that war. Because then, I'm serious, because then the South would be this separate, noxious nation to our south. And guess what? The South would be this sort of, this buffer between us and the illegal immigrants. They'll all flow into the horrible Confederacy and, be lynched and stuff there. I don't know. I look at the solid Republican South, this solid, crazed South. I can't stand these people. I'm sorry, I can't. It's an alien culture to me. I am such a Yankee. It is just an alien culture, and I think it is a culture that is a political culture, certainly, now, that is impeding our progress as a nation. So, here's the latest. Governor Phil Bryant of Mississippi, he has now signed a bill. He signed it with his grandmother's worn Bible on his desk. He signed a bill that gets him closer to what is his goal, which is that all those little kiddies in Mississippi should be able to praise Jesus in school. Because he agrees with Reverend Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, who, right after the massacre of those beautiful children in Newtown, Connecticut, said the following: "We ask why there is violence in our schools, but we have systematically removed God from our schools. Should we be surprised that schools would become places of carnage?" So, according to Huckabee, I guess it was the First Amendment that killed these kids, not guns. So the new Mississippi law, get this, requires public schools in Mississippi to develop policies that will allow students to pray over the intercom. They can do this whenever the Spirit moves them. They can do it at assemblies. They can pray at assemblies. They can pray at sporting events. Now, never mind that the Supreme Court, 12 years ago, ruled, it was a Texas case, I believe, that you cannot have student-led prayer over a PA system at high school football games or over the intercom during class. But let's not allow the Supreme Court of the United States to get in the way of any of these states in the South that simply refuse to recognize Supreme Court rulings. They take up so much of their time passing laws which they know to be unconstitutional. Here's what the governor of Mississippi said. You see, you just put on the program of the assembly or the football game or something, a disclaimer by the school administration which says that if a prayer does break out, it is not sanctioned by the administration. What? If a prayer breaks out, I thought riots broke out. Now, what breaks out? Acne breaks out. You have acne break out. Riots break out. Prisoners break out. Prayer? Now in Mississippi, if, who knows, prayer all of a sudden breaks out during a graduation or during a football game, well, that's perfectly okay, especially if there's been this little print, little tiny fine print at the bottom of some program, I guess, that you printed up, that says that if it should happen, it is not sanctioned by the state of Mississippi, which gets around that First Amendment crap. Unbelievable. This is the tyranny of the majority. The tyranny of the majority. They just assume, everybody they know has no problem with it, so it's cool. And I'm sure the prayer would have stopped that mass killing, right? Prayer would have stopped that. Indeedy. What was the bumper sticker my son saw in West Virginia? Something about the sound. You don't have the sound. When you take the sound of prayer out of school, it is replaced by the sound of gunfire. He saw, he texted me once. He saw that. He said, I think that's what it said. He said, do you believe that? Yeah. Sure I do. And why wouldn't I? Oh, Lord. Okay, I have something else here, but it's way too heavy duty to start a whole... I'm looking at the clock. We only have a few minutes left, so I will cease and desist on that one. Did everybody know that LBJ stuff? You didn't,
No.
Jess, but I mean, I remember. I mean, I'm not surprised by it, but to think that the voters were denied that information, you know, I can't believe that if that information had gotten out, that it would not have meant that Hubert Humphrey would have won. And then, of course, history has changed. You look at all these things that absolutely change everything. And if something's... Well, I mean, it almost, it sort of foreshadows, does it not, Nixon's inevitable fall. Because someone like him, who was so intent on getting that presidency, that he would break the law, that he would scuttle, actively scuttle efforts to stop that war so that he could get into the White House and then prolong it for 4 to 5 more years. And not so it would end in victory. We all know the pictures of the end. The mortification, the humiliation of the United States of America. Unbelievable. So if Nixon was as just a private citizen willing to pull out every stop to get what he wanted as president with the power of the presidency, why wouldn't he do the same? And of course he did. Only this time, his recordings took him down. They don't record stuff anymore. Think of all that's lost to history because after Johnson and Nixon, no president in his right mind would leave a trail like that. So the extraordinary, just rich motherlode of historic information found on Lyndon Johnson's presidential tapes and Nixon's will never be known again. They've wised up. Okay, that's it for today. My sister Susan tomorrow. Chris Potter Wednesday. Tom Sokolowski makes his return on Thursday. And we can only hope the sun will do the same. You have a great day.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper, Steel City Media, and its advertisers.